June 4, 1942, at 4:30 hours. On the bridge of the carrier Akagi, located approximately 240 nautical miles northwest of Midway Atoll, Commander Minoru Genda, battling pneumonia, stood in his pajamas as Japan's strike force prepared to launch an offensive. In the early morning darkness, 4 carriers, 11 battleships, and more than 200 vessels made up the most formidable naval armada ever assembled by Japan. Over 6 months of conflict, this fleet had never tasted defeat, bolstering the Imperial Japanese Navy's unwavering confidence. They had destroyed or damaged 8 American battleships at Pearl Harbor, conquered the Philippines, humiliated British forces in Singapore, and expanded their empire to cover 20 million square miles. Their next goal was to annihilate what remained of American naval power in the Pacific. On that morning, Genda and every other Japanese officer believed that the United States had no more than 2 operational carriers in the region, both presumed to be operating in the South Pacific. The Yorktown, severely damaged during the Battle of Coral Sea, would require extensive repairs for months. Radio silence ensured absolute security, though some suspected that Admiral Chester Nimitz might have been deciphering their messages for weeks due to American codebreakers who had cracked the N-25 billion Japanese naval code. While Genda reviewed his charts, 233 American aircraft were being armed on 3 carriers that Japan was certain did not exist. Within 14 hours, the Imperial Japanese Navy would suffer its first significant defeat, losing 4 irreplaceable carriers and witnessing the death of more than 57 of their finest naval aviators and crew members. The myth of Japanese invincibility would crumble alongside the burning carriers, marking the beginning of Japan's decline in the Pacific War. Despite initial assessments that favored Japan's numerical superiority, 8 carriers compared to America's 3, 11 battleships against none, and 248 aircraft versus approximately 233. The plan for Operation MI involved coordinating 200 vessels across vast expanses of ocean. According to official Japanese reports, the assumption of American weakness seemed reasonable at the time. Since Pearl Harbor, Japanese forces had secured victories that surpassed initial expectations. The capitulation of Singapore, involving some 85,000 British troops, along with the annihilation of the Abda fleet near Java and the capture of Burma, bolstered confidence in their military prowess. Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo, who commanded the carrier division's First Fleet, had raised concerns about operational complexity during staff meetings. His chief of staff, Rear Admiral Ryunosuke Kusaka, cautioned that the plan contravened the principle of concentrating forces. These warnings were disregarded, as similar doubts had been voiced prior to Pearl Harbor. The Japanese Navy was operating under several flawed assumptions revealed in post-war interrogations. American carriers were presumed to be stationed in the South Pacific, with Yorktown requiring 3 months for repairs. Additionally, it was believed that American torpedo bombers were ineffective and that pilots lacked experience. Crucially, maintaining complete radio silence was thought to ensure surprise. In the basement of Pearl Harbor's Hypo station, Commander Joseph Rochefort oversaw a team of cryptanalysts working under oppressive heat conditions. By May 1942, they had managed to decipher around 15 to 20% of Japanese naval communications, allowing them to discern patterns and intentions. A breakthrough emerged through meticulous analysis, as messages frequently referenced AF as an objective. Rochefort deduced that AF likely referred to Midway Island. To confirm this hypothesis, Captain Jasper Holmes suggested a deceptive maneuver. Midway sent an unencrypted distress signal about water purification issues. 2 days later, Japanese intelligence reported in JN-25 that the AF air unit was experiencing shortages of fresh water. Lieutenant Commander Edwin Layton, Admiral Nimitz's intelligence officer, later testified before Congress. He stated, "We knew their objectives, their routes, and their schedules with remarkable precision." This intelligence breakthrough extended beyond mere location data. American cryptanalysts had also determined the Japanese order of battle, pinpointing the attack date as June 4th or 5th, and even mapping out approach routes. Armed with this information, Nimitz positioned his carriers northeast of Midway in an area that Japanese search patterns would inadequately cover. The saga of Yorktown highlighted America's industrial prowess. The carrier was damaged during the Battle of Coral Sea by a bomb penetrating its flight deck and near misses that ruptured fuel tanks. Japanese estimates predicted 3 months for repairs, but Pearl Harbor repair crews managed to complete them in just 72 hours. According to Navy records, 1,400 workers worked around the clock from May 27th through May 29th. Repair teams stayed aboard as she set sail toward Midway, continuing their work throughout the journey. The speed of these repairs seemed almost miraculous compared to Japanese standards that required weeks for similar tasks. On June 4th at 430 hours, Admiral Nagumo ordered the launch of 108 aircraft aimed at Midway, 36 Kate torpedo bombers, 36 Val dive bombers, and 36 Zero fighters. The operation was executed smoothly, reflecting 6 months of successful campaigns. However, a critical oversight was made when only 7 search planes were dispatched, instead of the standard 22, due to an issue with one of the cruiser's catapults causing a delay in launching the 8th plane. This half-hour gap would turn out to be pivotal. At 534, Japanese fleets were spotted by PBY Catalina flying boats from Midway, and radar detected the approaching airstrike at 553. All available aircraft, Marine fighters, torpedo bombers, dive bombers, and even B-17s, were scrambled into action as the Americans had anticipated this attack. Lieutenant Joe Kai Tominaga, leading the assault against Midway, radioed back at 700 that a second wave was necessary due to stronger-than-expected resistance from Midway's defenses and operational airfields. Admiral Nagumo now faced a crucial decision regarding his next move, with his aircraft armed for ship attacks rather than ground targets. Without spotting any enemy fleet, at 715, he instructed the crew to rearm with fragmentation bombs for ground strikes. This move, documented in surviving Japanese records, sparked confusion on the hangar decks. According to standard Japanese protocol, expended ordnance should be returned to magazines, but time pressures led to a dangerous shortcut. Bombs and torpedoes were piled up on the hangar floors. At 728, an overdue search plane reported sighting what seemed like 10 enemy surface vessels bearing 10 degrees, about 240 miles from Midway. This vague report set off a flurry of activity. Could these be the carriers they dreaded? By 745, Nagumo asked for confirmation on the types of ships spotted. The response would take 30 crucial minutes to arrive. Between 920 and 1020, 3 American torpedo squadrons located the Japanese carriers. These attacks seemed suicidal. Outdated TBD devastators flying directly into enemy fire at a speed of 120 knots against Zero fighters, capable of reaching 330 knots. Torpedo Squadron 8 from Hornet initiated the assault first. Of the 15 planes that took part, only one survived. Ensign George Gay watched helplessly as his squadron was wiped out. His after-action report detailed multiple passes by Japanese fighters methodically destroying each aircraft in formation. Torpedo Squadron 6 from Enterprise lost 10 of its 14 aircraft. Similarly, Torpedo Squadron 3 from Yorktown suffered the loss of 10 out of 12 planes. Not a single torpedo hit any Japanese ship. Japanese post-battle analyses characterized the assaults as courageous but imprudent. They failed to recognize that these unsuccessful attacks had depleted all the Zero fighters, leaving them grounded near sea level and devoid of high-altitude coverage. Around 10:20 a.m., Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey's dive bombers from the USS Enterprise arrived on the scene. McCluskey extended his search beyond the expected interception point, deducing that turning north would be logical, and followed a destroyer's wake as it raced to rejoin its fleet. In his after-action report, he noted that carrier decks were cluttered with aircraft in preparation for launch, but no fighters were visible at higher altitudes. The attack commenced at 10:22 a.m. when Lieutenant Richard Best dropped a 1,000-pound bomb through the deck of Kaga, causing an explosion in the hangar amid stacked ordnance. Within seconds, secondary explosions spread throughout the ship. Simultaneously, Yorktown's dive bombers struck Soryu with 3 bombs, transforming her into a blazing inferno within just 20 seconds. Kajero suffered 4 direct hits from Enterprise bombers. The first bomb penetrated near the forward elevator and exploded amidst fueled aircraft. By 10:28 a.m., all 3 Japanese carriers were critically damaged. The effectiveness of the attacks was remarkable. Out of 41 dive bombers engaged, only 3 were lost. In just 6 minutes, the naval power dynamics in the Pacific had permanently shifted. Post-war interrogations revealed detailed accounts of their destruction by surviving officers. Kaga burned for nearly 12 hours before Captain Toshio Hasegawa was ordered off at 2 a.m. on June 5th by Yamamoto himself to prevent capture. At 4:50 a.m., Japanese destroyers torpedoed the carrier with 4 Type 93 torpedoes, sinking her at 5:20 a.m., claiming 267 lives in the process. Kyrgyz's fires became uncontrollable due to damaged fire mains. Commander Takahisa Amagai issued an abandoned ship order at 16:40 hours. The vessel eventually exploded and sank at 19:25 with 811 casualties, marking the highest loss among the 4 carriers involved. Soryu went down on June 4th at 1913 after burning for 9 hours. Captain Ryasaku Yanagi Mat elected to stay aboard until the end, reportedly last seen on the bridge as the ship sank. The death toll was 711. You were the lone survivor of the morning assault and orchestrated 2 strikes that critically damaged Yorktown. However, at 17:00 hours, American dive bombers discovered her and delivered 4 hits. She ultimately capsized on June 5th at 900 hours. Admiral Tamini Yamaguchi and Captain Tomio Kaku chose to go down with their ship, resulting in a total loss of 416 lives. Yorktown's resilience highlighted the superior damage control efforts of American forces. Despite suffering 3 bomb hits from Huryu's initial strike and 2 torpedo strikes from the second wave, she stayed afloat for 2 full days. Only on June 7th did she finally sink after being hit by a torpedo from submarine -168 on June 6th. The total loss of American lives amounted to 307, with 1 carrier, 1 destroyer, Hammond, and 150 aircraft destroyed. For the Japanese, there were 357 fatalities, 4 fleet carriers lost, along with heavy cruiser Makuma, which sank on June 6th. Additionally, Japan suffered the loss of 248 aircraft and 110 experienced aircrew who could not be replaced. Post-war analysis revealed American intelligence superiority in detail. A historical study by a national security agency declassified in 2006 confirmed that Station Hypo accurately predicted the date of the attack within 1 day. The report also detailed the complete Japanese order of battle, approach routes, deployment patterns, and their plans to occupy Midway following its capture. The study revealed that no military operation in history had ever commenced with such thorough knowledge of the enemy's plans. On June 4th at 23:55 hours, Admiral Yamamoto called off Operation MI and instructed his forces to withdraw. He was aboard the super battleship Yamato, located about 300 miles behind the carriers, commanding an unprecedentedly powerful surface fleet, but unable to influence the situation. According to official reports, Yamamoto considered engaging the American fleet in a night battle with his battleships. His staff estimated that they could reach the Americans by dawn, around 200 hours. However, without air support and facing American carriers at first light, the risk was deemed too high. This retreat marked the first time during the war that a Japanese operation had been canceled due to enemy action. The consequences of Midway went beyond immediate losses. On June 4th, 1942, Japan's strategic offensive in the Pacific came to an end, and all subsequent operations would be defensive or reactive in nature. The loss of experienced pilots was particularly devastating. The 110 aircrew lost had accumulated over 800 flight hours each on average, many having served since the early stages of the conflict in China in 1937. Japan's pre-war training program could only produce around 100 pilots per year, whereas the U.S. Navy was already training 25 monthly by this time. Japanese naval doctrine, rooted in the concept of a decisive battle based on their victory at Tsushima in 1905, had become outdated. The Americans showed that modern naval warfare now depended more on industrial capacity and intelligence than on martial spirit alone. Production statistics confirmed Japan's dire situation after Midway, with only 12 carriers completed from that date until the end of the war compared to America's 141 fleet carriers and 124 escort carriers produced over the same period. Aircraft production between 1942 and 1945 further illustrated this disparity. Japan had approximately 65,000 pilots by 1944, whereas the United States counted around 297,000. Japanese pilot training involved an average of 150 to 200 flight hours before entering combat, compared to over 600 hours for their American counterparts. In terms of industrial capacity, the U.S. national income was about 17 times that of Japan's pre-war levels. The United States supplied 2/3 of all Allied military equipment. Post-war technical analysis by Japan highlighted several systematic vulnerabilities and design flaws in its carriers, including enclosed hangar decks that could trap explosions, inadequate fire suppression systems, insufficient damage control procedures, and poor ventilation systems. Additionally, Japanese aircraft were found to be lacking armor and self-sealing fuel tanks, which contributed to their high performance but also compromised survivability. There was no effective pilot rescue system in place. Operational deficiencies included inadequate search patterns, with 7 planes being deployed instead of the doctrinal 22. Poor radio discipline further complicated matters. Despite maintaining silence, an inflexible tactical doctrine hindered coordination and flexibility. In contrast, American damage control practices were exemplified by the Yorktown's resilience through multiple attacks, reflecting superior training, equipment, and design features. The crew was trained in firefighting techniques, using sea-OTWO systems, foam generators, portable pumps, and better compartmentalization to enhance survival rates. Japanese carriers proved highly susceptible to single hits due to induced explosions from their own ordnance, a problem that had been identified but not corrected following the Battle of Midway. The role of intelligence was crucial in securing victory. According to Admiral Nimitz's post-war assessment, without early information about Japanese movements and dispersed carrier forces, the battle would have likely ended differently. Station Hypo's achievements went beyond breaking codes by providing actionable intelligence that allowed for precise positioning of American carriers, strengthening Midway Island's defenses, conserving resources through tactical maneuvers, and maintaining strategic surprise despite numerical inferiority. Post-war interrogations revealed command issues, inadequate reconnaissance efforts documented in action reports, overemphasis on rearming rather than combat readiness, failure to launch available aircraft during attacks, poor coordination with supporting forces, overly complex plans requiring perfect timing, divided forces conducting simultaneous operations, underestimation of American capabilities, and ignoring intelligence warnings about increased American radio traffic. The defeat at Midway led to a chain reaction that is well documented in Japanese training records. Prior to Midway, pilots underwent 2 years of rigorous training, accumulating between 500 and 700 flying hours. Following the battle, an emergency program was implemented, reducing the training period to 4 months with only 150 to 200 hours of instruction. By 1944, some Japanese pilots were sent into combat with less than 100 hours of experience. In contrast, American pilot training consistently improved over time. In 1942, the average was around 400 hours. By 1943, it had risen to about 500 hours, and by 1944, pilots were receiving more than 600 hours of training. This significant disparity in experience levels eventually became insurmountable. During the Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944, Japanese pilots averaged just 200 hours of flight time compared to American pilots who had over 600 hours. The outcome was devastating for Japan. They lost 346 aircraft while the Americans only suffered 30 losses. Midway forced the Japanese to acknowledge America's industrial superiority. According to captured documents, Japanese strategists calculated that to match U.S. carrier production would require 3 times their total steel output and 4 times their aluminum capacity. Additionally, the necessary fuel oil was not available in Japan. The arithmetic of defeat became apparent. The repercussions of Midway extended to subsequent operations. At Guadalcanal in August 1942, Japan deployed forces piecemeal due to the loss of carrier strength from Midway. At Santa Cruz in October 1942, despite achieving a tactical victory, Japan suffered unsustainable losses with 99 aircrew fatalities compared to just 26 American casualties. Finally, during the Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944, Japan's rebuilt carrier force was decimated, losing 476 aircraft and 450 aircrew members in what became known as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. At Midway, technological differences became increasingly apparent as the war progressed, particularly regarding radar systems. The Americans had shipboard radar capabilities, while the Japanese depended on visual observations for communication. American vessels used TBS, talk between ships, for coordination, whereas the Japanese primarily relied on flags and lights. Additionally, the United States was able to decrypt JN-25, a key naval code system, while the Japanese never managed to break American codes. In terms of production, the Americans continuously refined their design processes, whereas the Japanese struggled with retooling their factories. Post-war interrogations and memoirs offer verified accounts from those involved in the conflict. Captain Teijiro Aoki, who commanded a Cage-class submarine, testified that improper storage of ordnance led to an induced explosion aboard his ship, resulting in catastrophic damage from just one bomb hit. Commander Yasuji Watanabe, operations officer for Admiral Yamamoto, confirmed during interrogation that Yamamoto privately acknowledged the war was lost after Midway, despite this never being publicly announced. Ensign George Gay, the sole survivor of Torpedo Squadron 8, provided detailed reports following the attack that greatly illuminated Japanese carrier operations. Modern historians, including Jonathan Parshall and Anthony Tully in their 2005 publication, Shattered Sword, have debunked several prevalent myths. One such myth is that Japanese carriers were just 5 minutes from launching aircraft when they were attacked. However, operational records show a minimum requirement of 30 to 40 minutes was necessary for readiness. Nagumo ought to have conducted a partial strike. Reality: Japanese doctrine dictated coordinated attacks, and partial strikes were not practiced. Myth: poor reconnaissance results stemmed from flawed search patterns rather than bad luck. The impact of Midway went beyond the immediate strategic lessons of the war. Intelligence superiority can offset numerical disadvantages. Industrial capacity is crucial for long-term conflict outcomes. Adaptability in technology is more important than initial advantages. Logistics and production capabilities are superior to tactical genius. Post-Midway, naval doctrine changed. Carrier concentrations were no longer seen as advisable. The focus shifted toward radar and electronic warfare. Damage control became a priority on par with offensive operations. Preserving pilots took precedence over the traditional concept of honor-bound sacrifice. Admiral Chester Nimitz's official report emphasized that intelligence was the key factor in the Battle of Midway. We had comprehensive knowledge of Japanese plans, strength, and timing. Japanese naval historian Mitsuru Yoshida noted that following the Battle of Midway on June 4, 1942, their navy was in a defensive position rather than an offensive one. The decisive encounter of World War II's Pacific Theater took place during this critical period. According to the U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey's analysis of Japanese records after the war, the Imperial Japanese Navy never recovered from the Battle of Midway. All subsequent operations were limited by the losses sustained between June 4 and 5, 1942. The forces involved included Japan, 4 fleet carriers, 2 light carriers, 11 battleships, 16 cruisers, 46 destroyers, and a total of 248 carrier aircraft. United States, 3 fleet carriers, 8 cruisers, 15 destroyers, and a combined total of 360 aircraft, 233 carrier-based and 127 land-based. The losses were significant. Japan lost 4 fleet carriers, 1 heavy cruiser, 248 aircraft, and 57 personnel, including 110 aircrew. The United States suffered the loss of 1 fleet carrier, 1 destroyer, 150 aircraft, and 307 lives. Japanese carrier strikes commenced at 4:30 on June 4, with their period of dominance lasting until 9:28. The critical American counterattack began around 10:22 and lasted for only 6 minutes. The battle stretched from approximately 4:30 on June 4 to just after 9 o'clock on the morning of June 5, spanning a total of about 28 hours. The outcome at Midway serves as historical evidence that intelligence, preparation, industry, and technological adaptation can triumph over surprise attacks and initial military superiority. Hubris continues to be warfare's most dangerous adversary. On June 4, 1942, the Imperial Japanese Navy launched a formidable attack on Midway with its then-largest carrier fleet ever assembled. However, by evening, that powerful force had been shattered. The Americans reversed the tide through strategic planning and intelligence rather than mere chance. In just 6 minutes of synchronized dive-bomber assaults, they altered the course of the Pacific War. Every subsequent engagement would be shaped by the understanding that American industrial capacity and military intelligence had already sealed Japan's fate. Although Japan continued fighting for 3 more years, its prospects for victory evaporated with the sinking of 4 carriers northwest of Midway on that fateful day. The battle demonstrated that modern naval warfare was now a contest between technological superiority and industrial might. While Japan possessed superior tactical skills and combat experience, the United States outmatched them in intelligence gathering and the ability to replenish its losses. This clash revealed that the future belonged to those who could leverage advanced technology and robust manufacturing capabilities over traditional military prowess. Midway stands as a pivotal triumph for the U.S. Navy, not only due to tactical achievements, but also because it confirmed that democratic nations could harness industrial might and technological innovation to counteract militaristic expertise. The Japanese had anticipated an easy victory. Instead, they faced the nascent stages of their empire's downfall.